Imagine a world where animals don't just exist, they perform. A world where lions march, swans glide, and kangaroos hop, all to the rhythm of an invisible orchestra. This isn't a fantasy. It's the world created by one of music's most misunderstood geniuses, Camille Saint-Saëns. But the story behind his most famous creation, the Carnival of the Animals, is far stranger than you could ever imagine. It's a tale of rebellion, secrecy, and a composer's desperate attempt to control his own legacy. A secret he took almost to his grave. Born in Paris in 1835, Camille Saint-Saëns was a prodigy of staggering proportions. At just 2 years old, he could pick out tunes on the piano. By 3, he was composing his first pieces. By 10, he was performing Mozart concertos from memory in packed concert halls, even offering to play any of Beethoven's 32 sonatas as an encore. The Parisian press hailed him as the next Mozart. He was a sensation, a genius, who seemed destined to lead the future of French music. He mastered the organ, studied astronomy and archaeology, wrote poetry and plays. To the world, he was a living symbol of French cultural brilliance, a man who could do no wrong. But beneath this polished surface, a storm was brewing. As the 19th century wore on, the musical world was changing. Composers like Wagner and Liszt were pushing boundaries, creating massive, emotionally charged works that broke all the old rules. This new wave, Romanticism, was all about raw passion and dramatic storytelling. And it was everything Saint-Saëns was not. He was a classicist at heart. He believed in structure, elegance, and clarity. He saw music as an art of perfect form, not a messy outpour of personal feeling. His colleagues, like César Franck, and his own students, Gabriel Fauré and Claude Debussy, were embracing the new, modern sound. They saw Saint-Saëns as a relic, a stubborn old master clinging to the past. They mocked him in private, calling his music cold, academic, and lacking in soul. He was the establishment, the very thing they were rebelling against. The criticism stung. Deeply, Saint-Saëns, the man who had been hailed as a god in his youth, was now being dismissed as a fossil. He grew bitter, defensive, and increasingly isolated. He believed his critics were blind to true artistry, obsessed with cheap emotional tricks. He saw himself as the guardian of a sacred tradition, a lone soldier defending the fortress of French musical integrity against a barbarian horde. This internal conflict, this war between his public persona and his private frustrations, would set the stage for the most bizarre and brilliant act of his career. In 1886, Saint-Saëns was exhausted. He had just endured a disastrous concert tour of Germany, where his music was met with indifference. Feeling betrayed by the critics and the public, he retreated to a small Austrian village for a much-needed break. It was here, far from the pressures of Paris, that something inside him snapped. He decided to do something purely for himself, something fun, something utterly ridiculous. He began to sketch a series of short, witty pieces for a private concert among friends. He called it the Carnival of the Animals. This wasn't some grand symphony. It was a joke, a grand zoological fantasy. He poured all his wit, his frustration, and his genius into these musical caricatures. He depicted a royal march of the lion with pompous, roaring pianos. He wrote a piece for clucking hens and roosters. He created a clumsy, waltzing elephant, hilariously playing a deep, grumbling double bass. Each piece was a miniature masterpiece of mimicry. He used a glass harmonica to create the ethereal, shimmering sound of an aquarium. He used frantic, leaping pianos to paint a picture of wild donkeys. It was brilliant, it was hilarious, and it was deeply personal. But the Carnival of the Animals was more than just a musical zoo. It was Saint-Saëns' secret revenge. He embedded hidden jokes aimed directly at his critics. In the movement pianists, he portrays them as clumsy animals, practicing their scales mindlessly and unevenly. In Fossils, he quotes his own symphonic poem, Danse Macabre, alongside French nursery rhymes and arias from popular operas. The message was clear. This is what you think is old and dead. This is what you consider a fossil. He was mocking the very idea of what was considered serious music. He even parodied other composers, like Offenbach and Berlioz. This was his private rebellion, a musical middle finger to the entire Parisian establishment that had turned its back on him. He was using his immense skill to create something that was, by his own standards, utterly frivolous, and he loved it. The private performance was a smash hit. His friends were in stitches, amazed by the wit and charm of the work. They begged him to publish it. And this is where our story takes its twist. Saint-Saëns refused. Absolutely not. He was horrified at the thought of this trifle being made public. Why? Because he knew exactly what would happen. He was Camille Saint-Saëns, the serious composer, the guardian of French tradition. If the world heard this silly, joke-filled suite, his reputation would be ruined. The critics who already called him old-fashioned would now call him childish. His legacy, everything he had worked for, would be reduced to this. This carnival. He was terrified of being remembered as the guy who wrote the animal music. So, he locked it away. He made a legal decree. The Carnival of the Animals was not to be published or performed publicly during his lifetime. He made one single exception. Just one. He allowed the publication of a single movement, a piece of such breathtaking beauty that it stood in stark contrast to the rest of the suite's humor. It was a cello solo called The Swan. This piece, with its graceful, flowing melody floating over shimmering piano chords, was pure, unadulterated beauty. It was elegant, perfectly formed, and emotionally profound. It was everything he wanted his music to be. He allowed the swan to be his public face, while the rest of the chaotic, hilarious carnival remained his private secret. For the next 35 years, the Carnival of the Animals remained a phantom. A legend whispered about in musical circles. People knew it existed, but almost no one had heard it. Saint-Saëns went on with his career, composing operas, symphonies, and concertos, always maintaining his image as a serious, dignified composer. He died in 1921 at the age of 86, a respected, if somewhat controversial, figure in the history of music. And then, the bomb dropped. As per his will, the ban was lifted. In February 1922, just a few months after his death, the Carnival of the Animals received its first public performance. The world was stunned. They had known Saint-Saëns as the stern classicist. They had known him through the sublime beauty of the swan. They were not prepared for the wit, the humor, the sheer, uninhibited fun of the full suite. It was an instant, runaway success. And it led to the one thing Saint-Saëns had feared most. Here is the final, shocking irony of his life's work. Camille Saint-Saëns, the man who wrote 5 symphonies, a dozen operas, and countless concertos, the man who desperately wanted to be remembered for his grand, serious works, is today known almost exclusively for the one piece he tried to bury forever. His greatest fear became his legacy. The Carnival of the Animals is now one of the most beloved and frequently performed pieces in the entire classical repertoire, introducing millions of children to the orchestra every year. The joke he wrote in a moment of frustration outlived all his serious masterpieces. Was it a tragic failure or an accidental triumph? Perhaps the genius of Saint-Saëns was so immense that even his jokes were masterpieces, destined to be loved whether he wanted them to be or not. The man who tried to control his own story ended up creating a legacy far grander and far more fun than he ever could have planned. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into musical history, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories behind the music. See you next time.